change. Without question. It also, and most people don't acknowledge or recognize or realize, that not only are we experiencing the global warming issue, and not only are we deforesting and destroying entire ecosystems that support the oxygen exchange that supports life on this planet, but this form of coal extraction is burying the headwaters of the oldest mountain range in the United States, the Appalachian Mountains. And those are the headwaters that supply the majority of the population of this country with their drinking water. So when you have North Carolina and South Carolina under obvious drought conditions, you have an almost state of emergency in Atlanta due to their reservoirs drying up. And no one's proffered a reason why. Well, I'm here to tell you. If you bury the headwaters, then you're not going to have as much water. So the runoff is worse, so you have flash flooding, etc. But more importantly, the water is simply not allowed to accumulate in the mountains and filtrate to begin with. So let's talk a little bit about the audacity of hope, of what potential change that a lot of people are excited about. And those of you who are Obama supporters, other than the usury issues with credit cards that he has exacerbated that issue so that there's more credit card debt, but also he co-sponsored coal to liquid. And coal to liquid is going to exacerbate the entire mountaintop removal problem. And which also brought into the military, and now the Air Force is wanting contracts for this liquid fuel made from coal. And those entities are going to tell you that this is a security issue and that this will make you safer. Well, if energy in and of itself was indeed a security issue, then they wouldn't waste energy to begin with if it were domestic. In West Virginia alone, and up until just recently, about 4 million pounds of explosives go off every day. Much of those explosives, until just recently, were supplied to the energy sector by the United States military. Old ordnance. Now, how much of that was contaminated with depleted uranium, etc., no one knows for sure. But that was stopped when it was brought to the public light. Nonetheless, 4 million pounds of explosives. Now, this is after the bulldozers come in and they lay bare the mountain to begin with. They don't harvest the timber, which if you were in the private sector and good business, it seems like you need it for the New York Times. It seems like they've taken to harvest that timber to begin with, being good businessmen. They would, approach it in a very strategic manner. Well, their strategic manner is simply to denude the entire mountain, push all of the refuge over into the valley, use those explosives, obliterate the mountain, down to the coal seams. When they hit the coal seams, then they come in, they shovel up the coal, they transport that out, it's pulverized, thrown into blast furnaces, and creating this electricity. Now, I'm going to stop there because let's also look at business and the business of business. When we are outsourcing so much in this country today, it seems like it would be very important to the business sector to employ people here in the United States. So, when I was a boy, there were about 160,000 union miners in West Virginia alone. Today, there are about 15,000. Why? Because of mountaintop removal. When instead of putting 100 miners underground at risk of collapse or methane explosions, why not go and just blow the top off of that mountain and extract the coal with a dozen, maybe 20 people? Well, that's good business from their point of view, and it doesn't employ the communities. It destroys the communities. Homelands, graveyards, and the community itself eventually is literally obliterated and disappears. Back to the process of pushing that in and taking that refuge from the mountain and burying the headwaters. Now you have a flattened mountain. You have exacerbated the global climate change and greenhouse gas problem by blowing up the mountain to begin with. Not only the poisons, etc., of blowing the mountain up, but the methane that is in the coal seams. See, that's another energy source that they're not telling you about. You can literally drill down, frack a coal seam, and extract methane gas, which is a much cleaner form of energy, for the next 100 to 120 years. Leaving the mountain intact for posterity, the coal in place for future mining perhaps, and we leave the whole thing off to a generation that I, dear God, pray is much more intelligent than ours. Now, imagine if you did indeed extract the methane gas first before you mined it in any form, even if it's deep mining. Then if you're all, I'm sure, familiar with the saga of Sago mine disaster that happened in 2004 or five, excuse me. I was there. That a methane gas explosion. Now, you'll read that it was caused by lightning, because the company said so first thing. Well, lightning is an act of God, and so therefore fewer companies are held accountable for acts of God. Just like those of you who are old enough to remember the Buffalo Creek disaster in West Virginia. Wiped out 4,000 homes, killed 150 people within minutes, because just a couple of million gallons of sludge in an earthen dam broke during a rainstorm and wiped out 15 miles, peeled the pavement up off the roads, the bridges, the homes, everything. A swath 50 feet tall of just toxic sludge. Well, today you may have heard some of the things that are going on there as well. There's an elementary school that sits right at the base of one of these earthen impoundments, Marsh Fork Elementary. And that impoundment does not contain a couple of million gallons. It contains a couple of billion gallons of toxic sludge. And when they don't put it in the earthen dams to control, they've started something new. It's called sludge injection. It's much like some of the nonsense sort of carbon sequestration that you're hearing about. Well, if you just stick it down into the earth where no one can see it, then it's gone, right? Except that a third of West Virginians don't have public water. And they drink their water from wells. And those wells are contaminated through fissures, underground, in aquifers, where this sludge injection goes in and it contaminates the water. And then you have towns like Printer in Boone County, West Virginia, where not only can you not drink the water, you can't bathe your child in the water or yourself. Now, who's bringing that water in to support life in that town? Well, this is one of the ways that they destroy communities. They force you out. And are they going to pay for it? No. You are going to pay for it. You are the ones who are going to pay for that water to be shipped in to sustain that community. And I see my time is up. Thank you very much.
I really wish we had like all day just for this topic. That's how important it is. But we do have 3 other people that need to speak, so we should be able to squeeze them all in. Next up, Tammy Belinsky. She's an environmental defense attorney, and that's a field that I recommend most young people that ask me, what should I study in school? I said something for the environment, to defend it. So come on up, Tammy.
Thank you. I want to just acknowledge Jesse here because I know the way the system works, and I want to give you $20 for what you're doing. I tell you, mountaintop removal mining is one of the issues that's nearest and most dearest to my heart. Maria opened up her comments, and I applaud her for saying that when she taught school, do you still teach school? You still teach? That she instructs that human beings are the most ignorant, she said stupid, species on the planet, and mountaintop removal mining is the example of just how stupid we are. We have no idea of the consequences that we're creating for ourselves from that practice. I argue, based on some research done in Australia, that land use change affects the weather, and that the weather that we're experiencing here in this region, I'm from here locally, is affected and will continue to be affected by the practice of mountaintop removal mining. I'm also wondering with the haze, anybody who's from around here, the increase in haze has coincided with mountaintop removal mining, and I think we're having uranium raining down on us every day. Don't know that. Don't quote me on that. But I'm an environmental scientist, I'm an engineer, and I'm an attorney. I'm here today, I actually practice law privately, but I'm here today representing the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. My friend Shereen Parsons lives here locally, works for Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund has developed a citizen organizing effort centered on how community self-determination of what communities look like, based on the fact that corporate rights have corporations have usurped our rights under the Constitution. The Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund uses a process based on the populist movement of educating citizens on self-governance and taking back control of your community through using the governance structure that we have of local governments and changing this power structure one local ordinance at a time, virtually. Examples of that here in Virginia have included an attempt to strip corporations from their rights to apply municipal wastewater sludge in their communities. That effort failed here in Virginia. Contrast that to the effort over in a community that's centered around the 50,000 acre wishful uranium mine operation that's now getting off the ground again here in Virginia. We have a community here that has adopted an ordinance that makes it criminal to have chemicals trespass into their community from the uranium operation. So they're setting themselves up to be able to enforce that law should the uranium mining actually occur. So the notion is to take back the self-governance in order to limit the imperial colonization that the imperialistic colonization that our government really perpetuates and does so through the Constitution. our citizens are lacking in understanding of the legal structure, the structure of the Constitution. It's a blueprint for corporate governance. The Bill of Rights were an afterthought, and the corporations, quickly after the adoption of the 13th and 14th Amendments, usurped the rights for equal protection and due process, and have more rights than we do. And that example, that phenomenon is made example again and again and again when communities stand up to bar the plundering of their resources in their communities, and they run right into three different things. First, they run into not being able to influence their local politicians. Then, because of the corporate interests that are just infused in our lives, then they run into the regulatory system that was set up to keep us in our place, and they run around on that like gerbils on wheels, never reaching their destination. And then if they do choose to challenge any actions by the corporations judicially, they run into the interpretation of the Constitution that reduces their rights to nothing and elevates the rights of the corporation above theirs. So then they run into a court system that in fact tells them that they have no rights. So I'm here to promote the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. I have some pamphlets on the democracy schools that they offer. Tom Lindsay, the founder, is working in other countries to help them change their constitutions. On the matter of, and so I guess the message there is that in order to get control of this, the energy issues, the water issues, we've got to limit corporate control over our resources. On the issue of climate change, specifically in forests, since I'm here, since I've been billed as the vice chair of Virginia Forest Watch, which is correct, there's a lot of interesting things going on here at this conference today that can also feed ideas for that, and that is that maintaining forests, getting them out of corporate control. We have forest cooperatives growing here in Virginia, and that's something to look into if you just do a little searching on the internet. Forest cooperatives, sustainable woods, locally grown woods, maintaining your forests while extracting from them only what you need in a sustainable manner that keeps a forest growing, single tree, uneven aged management in order to cultivate. It's forest gardening is what it is. And so look that up, check that out, see what you can do as a consumer to support that economy. If you're a forest landowner, there are things you can do as well. If you need any other information, look up virginiaforestwatch.org. And I have pamphlets for the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund here. Thank you very much.
I'm sure that when you talk and hear anybody talking about the environment or climate change, you can feel the passion. Unlike most politicians who just bloviate till you're in a coma. Okay, our next speaker is Byron Farrow. He is a journalist and an activist.
Thanks. One quick correction. My name is actually Brian. Yeah, the Y might throw some people off, but it's okay. Mitchell was briefly talking about sort of the trendiness of green culture that's pervaded America, and it's kind of a superficial, I think, trend. As he mentioned, even corporations have redesigned their whole images, which have nothing to do with redesigning their actual products or ambitions. It amounts to greenwashing, but even as consumers, we've really also kind of taken to the notion that we could save the environment by driving an energy-efficient car or installing electricity-saving appliances and buying local produce. And these are all wonderful things, and we should really focus on that, I think, in the long term. But right now, I'm also not sure if that would really be enough to prevent the kind of climate change that scientists are predicting by simply just moving towards a greener lifestyle. So I'd like to talk about what I think might be a more pressing and a damaging contributor to climate change, which is the military. Every year, 54% of American tax dollars gets funneled to the single largest consumer of oil in the world, which is the Pentagon. The official figure is 320,000 barrels of oil per day, but that only includes vehicle transport and facility maintenance. As journalist Don Fitz pointed out, in really the only article I've ever seen on this topic, that figure does not include energy for manufacture of vehicles, energy for building and dismantling military facilities, energy for construction of roads, and energy consumed while rebuilding whatever the military blows up. Nor does it factor in energy required by the military's partners, NASA, and the nuclear industry. Additionally, whenever a war or construction raises trees, it eliminates their ability to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Even so, that 320,000 barrels of oil per day used by the military is still more than most countries. Actually, there are only 35 countries that consume more oil than the U.S. military. Now here's the really interesting thing, and again I'm going to quote Mr. Fitz, who wrote, again, the only article I've seen on this. The military is the only sector of the economy where emissions of greenhouse gases can be reduced by greater than 100%. This is because militarism is the only type of activity whose primary purpose is destruction. This is a hugely important observation that every environmentalist and anti-war activist must incorporate into his or her arguments. Because when you think about it, when a road blows up, or when a hospital gets bombed and is completely leveled in Afghanistan or Iraq, energy has to be spent not only on the weaponry and the transportation of that weaponry, but also on the rebuilding and treatment of the seriously injured. And none of that really needs to happen at all. Worse yet is that the military pervades every part of our culture. By some estimates, it is now connected to roughly 50% of all economic activity in the U.S. That may seem like a hard figure to imagine, but we really need to understand that the Pentagon is connected to so many corporations. And if you look at the list, it's kind of a general who's who of the top companies in the world. The Pentagon has on its payroll IBM, Time Warner, Ford, and General Motors, Microsoft, NBC, and General Electric, which are all maybe things you would expect, but also there are companies like Sara Lee, Nestle, M&M, Mars, and Hershey. So that's just how pervasive the military is in our economy as a whole. According to Chalmers Johnson, spending for the U.S. military establishment during the current fiscal year of 2008 is conservatively calculated to be at least $1.1 trillion. This is larger than all other military budgets of the world combined. The supplementary budget, which pays for the two ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and is only a small portion of all military spending, is still greater than the next two highest defense spending countries combined, Russia and China. Meanwhile, investment in renewable energy and conservation amounts to only hundredths of a penny of the federal income tax dollar. Imagine how quickly we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions if instead of funding the largest consumer of oil in the world, we started funding clean energy solutions. That's, to me, like killing two birds with one stone. Right now, the U.S. Department of Energy is saying that solar thermal power plants covering a 100-mile square area of the Southwest which is about the size of 9% of the state of Nevada, could generate enough electricity to power the entire nation. The only caveat is the expense. No official estimates seem to exist on how much that would cost. But to me, it's hard to imagine that it could really be more than the $3 trillion plus we'll be spending on Iraq. And speaking of Iraq, wars like that would really no longer be necessary. Even John McCain has said as much when he talked about freeing America of its dependence on foreign oil. If we were to move towards clean energy and no longer required oil from the Middle East, you would see a dramatic decrease in our presence in that region of the world, which would inevitably lead to less hostility and less terrorism, and could be the goodwill gesture that almost would reverse the entire animosity that is pushing so many more young people in that region towards violence. Now, I realize that the idea of shrinking defense spending, especially in the short term, which is what's needed to reduce the dramatic effects of climate change. Dr. James Hansen of NASA, who's kind of the preeminent researcher on this topic, has given the window of about 10 years. I don't think realistically that we will be able to reduce defense spending certainly completely, but I think that we may not need to focus on that figure of 10 years, but at least look at it as the impetus to move very quickly. And I think that the trend is kind of hopefully becoming clear by now that every little bit we do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the present gives us an even greater return beyond simply preventing climate change. It helps solve so many of the other problems we've gathered this weekend to talk about. We may go from panel to panel and subject to subject and get the impression that there are 100 fronts to this battle we're fighting for a new world, but really they're all connected. If we can focus our effort on something like the military, which is, again, the greatest consumer of oil in the world, we will cut out by far the greatest polluter and free up money and resources to not only create a clean energy revolution, but a much more politically stable, healthier rest of the world that can embrace it as well. Thank you.
It's a very important topic. When we talk about the environment, environmental destruction, we don't think about all the ordnance we're dropping all over the planet at the speed of light, hundreds of thousands of pounds of bombs, depleted uranium, God knows what else. Remember, the Earth is a circle. What goes around comes around. So it's pretty scary times. While we've been sitting here this weekend, due to the melting of the Antarctic, and I understand the Arctic ice now starting to mimic it, they say we can expect more and more hurricanes and tornadoes here in America. This morning I checked the news and they had 2 huge tornadoes in California. While the rest of the week, Colorado had some serious tornadoes, Kansas and Oklahoma, and they're predicting a lot more tornadoes this season. Man, in its audacity to play God, has no idea when man comes up against nature. He's always gonna lose. That's just the way it goes. And, Mother Earth, Mother Earth's been talking, nobody's listening. And like fleas on a dog's back, she's gonna shake us off if we don't get the message soon. So I did want to share that. Again, this is a great panel. And what I'd like to see, and I haven't seen at this conference, is everybody telling everybody in the audience, etc., where to find you, where to find your work, where to find your website. I produce radio. I don't want to have to go hunting and pecking. I look through the conference thing and I'm like, why isn't everybody's website here? We need to get it together. There's lots of cool stuff that we can do to take back our climate. Again, do not wait for politics or religion to save you. Obviously, it's not working. Okay, it's up to us to do it. If you don't support my show, please consider doing so. I consider my show a lifesaver. I can teach you how to save money, how to save your life. goodness, Mitchell, you covered the dangers of vaccines. Whatever they're inoculating you with, you can guarantee that you will get it, okay? Check out drcarly.com. This one doctor has lost everything because she spoke out against the danger of vaccines. They will kill us all one way or the other, so you gotta be one step ahead. That's why I pride myself on presenting to people. Okay, last but not least, Susan Livingston. She's with the Department of Peace Campaign, so here's Susan.
Thank you. Hopefully it won't keep you too long. I want to first of all thank everybody for coming. Cindy Sheehan is a hard act to compete with. I want you to give yourselves a hand for showing up for this conference. As the mayor said, this is the real deal. It's happening today. Concurrently with this conference, or with this panel rather, we've got why localization going on, and following this, or right after lunch, we have sustainable communities going on, which to me is the proactive change that needs to be made. I want to thank my fellow panelists for basically preempting everything I wanted to say, so I don't have to hopefully keep you too far over time. I wanted to mention that I hope you'll forgive Mr. Gore, be a little bit easier on him than my fellow panelists have said, because the point is, he has the media's ear and eye, and he has the money to bankroll a real campaign. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah, he's got some really strange ideas about certain things. I love the idea, for example, of his carbon tax, but there's some classism involved there. You know, the guy's a billionaire. He has access to ways to reduce his carbon footprint that are not available to me. All right? But I don't think the idea is to overthrow him. I think the idea is to talk to him, because I think his heart is in the right place. I'm hoping. That's what I have to go on. We are, in fact, the only nation that has not yet signed the Kyoto Accord. And there I want to point towards localization. There are mayors' alliances all over the country that have been doing some fantastic things about setting out environmental standards for their particular sphere of influence. And I really want us to get on that bandwagon. I have been extremely encouraged by news coming out of the secessionist movement. They were supposed to be here. That was one of the main reasons I wanted to come to this conference. If you'll go to propeace.net and read my latest blog entry, it's called, "It's Not a Dirty Word Anymore." It's not a bunch of racist neo-Confederates anymore. There are real thinking, conscious, left-wing, if you'll excuse the expression, people out there who are trying to dismantle the federal government by nonviolent means. Okay? And they call themselves secessionists. So don't let the word scare you away. I think it's a very exciting movement, and I think it feeds right into the kind of localization that we're talking about at this conference. I want to thank Brian Farrell for connecting the dots between the peace movement and the environmental movement. This is something that an outfit called Wiser Earth, I don't know if you've been there yet, but the guy that launched that site, and I can't quite recall his name, I'm a little challenged with names, says that there are several million organizations globally trying to localize, working in environment, working in anti-war movement, the struggle of indigenous people against globalization. These three movements are experiencing a synergy. I mean, this groundswell is happening. I have to take exception to saying that we're the dumbest creatures around. We've done some dumb things, but it's about time we rallied and showed what we're made of. We can write, you know, I love Kathy Kelly's line, what will rise you? Are we ready to do this? I think we are. I think that groundswell is happening. Just since I've become involved with the Department of Peace campaign, which has been about 3.5 years now, I see an enormous difference in the attitudes of people. Even if they're not totally won over. Yeah, we haven't won their hearts and minds, but at least they're asking the questions. And this is movement, and I think we need this to continue. And our biggest enemy, us in this room, is not them and not each other. Our biggest enemy is our own burnout. So, you know, think positive, be proactive, and that won't happen to you, and we'll get the job done. I'm confident that we'll get the job done. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yeah?
If I might, I'm Steve Landa. I'd like to present a bit of the Prout perspective on the issues that have been discussed here. So,
Well, Steve, we have 1 minute. So speed talk.
first,
We can't hear you.
Come on up here.
First, the Prout's been propounded by P.R. Sarkar. The notion of cooperatives becomes a very critical antidote to the capitalistic model, in which things are produced for the consumer rather than for profit. And there was the conference that I tried to get to, but they just closed down. The second is the notion of progress. According to Sarkar, progress does not exist on the physical plane. It does not exist on the mental plane, because each time you make an advance on one, you get a detriment on the other physically. You get this, and then there's a side effect that you're talking about, that you can kill the bugs, but you kill off the cats too, etc., etc. So in the mental plane, the more knowledge you have, the less mental stability you have, so you get an increase of mental illness, with what we're seeing in the United States with depression, antidepressants being the maximum drug. So it becomes on the spiritual plane where a person experiences the inner peace when we get into the meditation, the yoga, and a variety of other techniques, some of which are being discussed here at this conference. So that's where the progress is at, and the purpose of the physical unification that we're doing is to enable everybody to have the wherewithal, the time, and the comfort to do those spiritual practices so that they can be happier. The next thing has to do with water management. Sarkar's got a bunch of really, really good articles on lakeside plantations and water conservation, which I encourage you to look up and read, or get a hold of me if you can't get a copy of it. And that includes planting trees by waterways, creating ponds to manage surface water instead of digging tube wells, which decrease the water table. And so these are ways of purifying and maintaining our water in such a way that we can all live together. And finally, the notion of animals and plants, which we only don't discuss very much. One of the things Sarkar did was, during his life, imported and created like zoos for vegetarian animals and imported plants from all over the place to give the endangered plants a place to live so that they can be preserved. And that's one of the things we need to do. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if you guys are going to show up, but at 4 o'clock I'm doing a panel at Russell Building on preventing unwanted presidencies. So if you can, check us out.